A young mother disappears without a trace in Lake Oswego, Oregon. She's had a fight with her husband and walked out. She's missing, and so is the family car. Police suspect the husband. A local psychic's visions reveal there's been a murder. But will a partnership between the psychic and the cop put the killer behind bars? March 31st, 1986. The police in Lake Oswego, a wealthy suburb of Portland, Oregon, get a call from 28-year-old John Burke. He reports that after a late-night argument, his wife, Alexis, left in the family car. She hasn't been seen for 3 days. Local detective Robert Lee is assigned to the case.
At that point in time, we didn't really know for sure that a crime had even been committed. I mean, let's face it, couples split up. I mean, it happens every day. They have arguments, one or the other will take the family car and leave.
But that theory just doesn't fit this situation.
In this case, there was also a 1.5-year-old child that had Down syndrome, and it would be extremely unusual for any mother to leave her child. Alexis was a very beautiful woman. She was a person that would never stay gone for more than a few hours at a time.
Lee and his investigators suspect the husband is being less than truthful about what happened 3 days earlier.
John Burke was lying to me through his teeth. His reactions were real bad. His physiological responses did not match what he was saying. And my impression was that whatever happened to Alexis, John was responsible for it. And I went back and essentially knocked on the man's door to interview him. And I asked him if it was okay if the crime lab could take a look at the apartment. He said yes, and I signaled for the crime lab to come in, and we conducted our interview outside the apartment while the crime lab did their work on the inside.
They found nothing suspicious, so they focus on finding the car that John Burke claims Alexis drove off in.
We reasonably expected that if we found the car, we were going to find Alexis.
Driven by increasing concern and frustrated at the lack of progress in the investigation, Alexis's mother takes an unusual step. A family friend recommends she call psychic Lorie McQuary. Over the phone, Lorie immediately gets impressions about a very violent encounter.
The very first sense I got, even without a picture, just hearing Alexis's name, I felt that she was gone. I felt that very strongly. It's like a heaviness right in the middle of my chest. I described Alexis, her personality, which was a bit volatile, very intense. John, I thought, was lazy. I thought he was just a guy who was coasting through life, and he had absolutely no plans on changing anything.
John was essentially unemployable by anybody but his own father, because John's work habits were atrocious, to say the least. He didn't want to show up if he didn't feel like it.
I could see an argument between the husband and the wife.
Lorie's view of the night Alexis disappeared matches with what John had been telling the police, but she sees more than the argument.
What I felt with Alexis and John and the argument that I envisioned was that it was in part about finances, and a lot of people fight about finances. That's usually part of a marital situation. But this was fueled by someone being on drugs, alcohol, and I certainly felt that Alexis hadn't been using it. In fact, one of the points that I made to her mom is I said, this woman turned her life around recently. And she said, yes, that was true. And I said, well, I don't think the husband had. And I thought that he was a very weak person and that he was still using drugs, and that in itself was creating a problem in the marriage. I felt that there had been a horrific fight and that it had happened right there in the house and that she was no longer in that area.
Within 4 days, police get a break. The family car has been abandoned in a rest area. Detective Lee finds it full of clues that just don't add up.
Alexis was 5 feet 1 inch tall and weighed approximately 115 pounds. She would have to be very close to the steering wheel to even reach the pedals. And yet the seat was pushed way to the back, like somebody my size or larger was actually driving the car. The ignition key was still in the ignition, and yet the doors were locked. From a police standpoint, that's what we call a proprietary interest in the car. Somebody might purposely leave the keys in, but he wants to lock the doors because he doesn't want somebody to take his car. There was an open map with a city in Washington that was circled. The fact that the map was there to begin with was disturbing because to us it felt like a setup right off the bat.
Although the car reveals unsettling information, Detective Lee knows he needs hard evidence a crime took place.
We did get a couple of dogs to search the entire rest area to see if there was perhaps a body that was around there, and came up with nothing.
Detective Lee's case has gone cold, so when he gets a call from Alexis's mother saying she's contacted a psychic, he's skeptical but willing to listen.
A police investigator really takes information, sometimes from oddball-type sources, and runs with that information just to see if that information is any good, if it can be corroborated, by another direction. I'm a left-brain thinker. I'm very good with things that I can see and touch, feel, that make reasonable sense to me. So I contacted her by phone, and I have to admit I probably was a little bit more flippant than I probably should have been.
I can remember that particular day, Detective Lee calling me and telling me that he was the detective working on the case, that he wanted to take me to lunch, and he wanted to check me out. It didn't sit well.
Detective Lee is anxious to hear what Lorie has to say and convinces her to meet him for lunch. Lorie just wants to help find Alexis's body for her family.
She told me an awful lot about my case.
I see numbers.
Lorie tells Detective Lee that she keeps seeing the number 15. He's intrigued. Alexis's car was found 15 miles from her home. Maybe that's the connection.
I watched his body language. He removed his glasses and put them on the table. And I thought, gotcha. You're interested.
Lorie has a flash of information about the car used to transport Alexis's body.
There's a larger car, older car, and as I'm almost looking at it, I'm back of it and I'm seeing the trunk lid open, and it's a huge trunk.
Detective Lee can't see the link. Alexis's car is a two-door with a small trunk, not the larger car Lorie's describing.
When you're talking about a car, a big car, spend the next 5 minutes driving the highway and you'll see 100 of them.
Lorie's next bit of info makes Lee even more skeptical.
She told me that the younger brother, Kelly, was involved. I'd interviewed Kelly. Kelly was actually playing ball for the college that he attended in Southern California at the time of the disappearance of Alexis Burke.
I can see the brother handling her body, helping carry it. I can see shovels involved, and I can see this family connection.
We checked with the college. They verified the fact that Kelly was literally over 1,000 miles away at the time. That automatically made 8 or 10 of the other things that Lorie told me that couldn't possibly be true simply because his involvement couldn't have been there.
Detective Lee's investigation contradicts many of Lorie's clues, but Lorie is sticking to her guns. If she's right, Lee could be missing some crucial evidence.
I remember telling him, it's going to be different than you think. It will bear me out. Wait and see.
Lorie decides on a dangerous path. She takes the investigation into her own hands and arranges to meet the man she believes to be the killer.
I just had to meet him.
Alexis Burke, a young mother from a suburb of Portland, appears to vanish into thin air. While police suspect her husband, John, they have no evidence a crime has been committed. Alexis's mother contacts psychic Lorie McQuary, hoping she'll be able to help police find her daughter. Lorie decides she has no time to waste. Alexis's husband is packing up the apartment, preparing to rent it out, so Lorie takes a risk.
I knew the minute I met him, looked in his eyes, maybe if I was even fortunate enough to shake hands with him, I would get a further impression.
The police found nothing when they searched the apartment. Now it's psychic Lorie's turn.
He answered the door. He was very laid back, and I don't know if he was on drugs or not, but he was just very calm. And of course, I pretended to be a renter. As I went through that apartment, of course, I think not just as a psychic, but I think just as another human being, I thought, where is the wife's picture? Is there nothing here? There was nothing, not a thing of hers there, nothing. And she had only been missing a couple of months, nothing.
Lorie's observations are chilling.
And I thought, how cold. You've already buried her, not only literally, but symbolically. She's gone from your life. When I turned to leave and thanked him, I shook his hands. And when I held his hand, I can just feel these around her neck. I know that's how he murdered her.
My reaction when Lorie told me that she'd gone to the apartment and met John was one of utter disbelief. Here was a person that even she thought was a murderer. And I was convinced of it at that point, and yet she's going up and making contact with him in an apartment. I was very upset.
After going to the apartment, that's when I began to get stronger and stronger feelings about where she was buried.
But I still was a basic skeptic. I believe what I can see, what I can prove.
Still, he's willing to listen. Can the psychic help Detective Lee find the body?
One iota, nothing of her belongings there. Once or twice a week, we would sit in hypotheses with each other about what I think happened here and what he thinks.
One of the things that Lorie had come up with right off the bat was 1-5. She didn't know whether the 1-5 meant Interstate 5, whether it was 1.5 miles, or what the significance of the 15 was. In this case, 15 could very easily have been, we're about 15 miles from the place where we thought the death had occurred.
And there was a place called Bell's Landing.
Bell's Landing, according to Lorie, was an important item as far as the relationship between John and Alexis was concerned.
Detective Lee and psychic Lorie McQuary didn't know if they were looking for an actual place or not. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack.
Maybe this is interesting.
Right down the way over here is where John and Alexis used to spend an awful lot of time. In Oregon, Bell's Landing could either be the side of a mountain where they park machinery when they're clear-cutting an area or doing a logging operation. It could also be a landing alongside of a river. And in this area of Oregon, we have some very, very large rivers, so it's quite plausible that there would be a landing named Bell's somewhere.
That's the frustrating part. Sometimes I get the clues, sometimes I get the symbologies, and it's up to me to make it fit. It's up to me to do the interpretation. And it isn't always like a teletype. I wish it were. We even went out on a couple of searches together in areas out as where she had lived previously, which is not very far from here. So he made the effort. He was at least cooperative and open. You know, it's part of what I saw, but I don't think this is the spot.
So you're not actually getting any...
I'm not getting any vibes, let's put it that way.
Lorie told very specifically that the body was buried.
Her head was just inches away from a little creek. I also felt that he had buried her where he could watch her.
That meant an awful lot to us, but what exactly did it mean? Did it mean he could keep an eye on it from work? Was it near his home?
And it was about that time that I was really talking to him about it's in a field, there's a building, but it's not a regular building like you would just walk in and do business in.
The more time they spend together, the more Detective Lee trusts Lorie's visions. They match his own hunches about the husband.
She has an insight into people and places and things that I don't even understand.
The scenario will play out. I will see the person, I will see the circumstances. Sometimes the reception may become a little hazy. It isn't always crystal clear. It may come in and out, but it's exactly like watching a television show. I could see him eating his lunch. He goes out there, eats his lunch, and watches the site. The site is within range. He can see it. And as long as it's not disturbed, he knows he's not in trouble.
It looks like John is going to get away with murder, but Lorie's psychic instincts tell her he's made a big mistake.
This was something where many people knew what had happened.
Lorie is convinced John has told someone about the murder. Detective Lee rethinks the investigation and decides on a new approach.
We used an awful lot of what we would consider to be behavioral analysis on John. We knew that if we applied pressure to John, that his past history would indicate that he would talk to somebody. And yet we didn't want to put so much pressure on him that he was going to invoke his rights per Miranda, which in the United States is a pretty big thing, simply because it meant that we were no longer able really to talk directly to John without the interference of an attorney.
I've always thought, you know, sometimes the best crimes in the world have been solved by the girlfriend who was dumped. And I knew that John had had a girlfriend.
Just as Lorie predicted, that's exactly what happened.
A former girlfriend of John Burke was living with some girls that were attending college, and she mentioned to one of the girls that she had a former boyfriend who had killed his wife. This girl contacted another girlfriend, who talked to another girlfriend about it, who talked to another girlfriend about it. The sixth girlfriend in line contacted her father. The father of this girl contacted the police department.
Based on the father's tip, police track down John's former girlfriend, Julie, and bring her to Portland. She agrees to cooperate, and they arrange to tape her phone conversations with John.
He said that he'd strangled his wife. Julie got the impression that the body was buried. We were driving by the metal fabrication plant where John and his younger brother worked. And Julie mentioned that John became very different every time that they went by that area.
But John's confession to his old girlfriend isn't enough. Police still need a body to get a conviction. Lorie sees Alexis buried somewhere where John can keep a close watch on her. It makes sense it would be close to where he worked. Following his own intuition and Lorie's clues, Detective Lee decides to search the 15 acres beside the plant. Maybe this is the clue 15 Lorie keeps seeing.
Has a very, very large metal fabrication building with very little in the way of vegetation. The 15 acres that was right next to it was ideal because the trees and the brush provided an awful lot of cover and concealment. Access was pretty much restricted. We sent cadaver dogs over the 15 acres, and their handlers came back with essentially nothing. I was personally disappointed that we were not able to find the body.
As Detective Lee and I would talk throughout the year occasionally about the case, of course, there would be times when he felt that maybe John was going to crack. And I would just always share with him my philosophy. Everything happens when it's supposed to.
It's a real low point in the investigation. Without Alexis's body, police can't charge John with murder. But Lorie is sure John's younger brother Kelly is involved, despite the fact he's given police what appears to be an airtight alibi.
I think Kelly just happened to be the wrong guy at the wrong time, and he was related to the murderer. And so he helped dispose of her body.
Kelly was in Southern California during the specific time frame that Alexis disappeared, and a reasonable person would believe that Kelly could not have had any involvement simply because of the time frames. He was literally over 1,000 miles away at the time.
I generally find what I get as a first impression is correct, and I remember telling him I'm standing by it.
It's been a year since Alexis Burke went missing after an argument with her husband, John. With the case going cold and based on her track record, Detective Lee decides to listen to psychic Lorie McQuary and take another look at the brother's story.
John essentially has no friends of his own. His best friend in the world is his younger brother. If the younger brother knows anything about it, that would automatically mean that his best friend would know all about the case.
Kelly's friends and former roommates are all law students. They've been interviewed once about the disappearance of Alexis. This time, Detective Lee re-interviews them with a grand jury subpoena in his hand, threatening each with jail time if they refuse to cooperate. From what Kelly's friends have to say, it becomes very clear that Kelly knows something. He's brought in for questioning, and Detective Lee persuades him to cooperate.
He told me everything I wanted to know. Yes, he was in Southern California playing ball, but the game had gotten rained out. He was actually back in Oregon 24 hours earlier than he was supposed to be.
It is a turning point for the investigation. If it hadn't been for Lorie's conviction, police might never have re-interviewed the brother, and his information was just what they needed to get an arrest.
Bob Lee does not give compliments lightly, but he did kind of offer that up and say, well, I guess you were right. And I just felt that there was a shift at that point.
The deal we made with Kelly was very simple. We were concerned that because the body had been in the ground for so long that we would not be able to formally identify Alexis Burke. The dental records we had were several years old. We knew there were not going to be any fingerprints. There was not going to be anything that was actually going to tell us for certain that this was Alexis Burke and not somebody else. And that would be a loophole that a defense attorney would be able to drive a truck through. So we essentially made a deal with Kelly that we would not prosecute him in any way, shape, or form for his complete assistance in the case, including showing us where the body was.
I felt that there had been a horrific fight.
Kelly confirms Lorie's original vision of a strangulation. He tells Detective Lee how a family argument escalated into murder.
Alexis walked out the front door, slammed the door behind her. When she got to the car, she didn't have car keys, and she was in her nightgown. So she came back and started screaming at John.
He had big hands. I can just feel these around her neck. I know that's how he murdered her.
He came over to her and put his hands around her neck. John said to shut her up because she was really making a lot of noise. John says he ripped off the electrical cord and tied it around Alexis's neck just to make sure that she was dead. The body was rolled up in the carpet behind the couch for at least 36 hours. During that time frame, that at least 12 members of his family and her family were in the apartment.
When Kelly finally showed up, he helped John dispose of the body just as Lorie had envisioned.
There's a larger car, older car.
They put the body of Alexis into the back of their father's car, which was a very large Lincoln, dark in color. They then took the body out in the middle of the night and actually dug a hole about 75 yards from the corner of the building where they both worked and buried Alexis.
There's water involved and not a large body of water.
The body was right next to a very, very small rivulet of water. The head was the closest to that water, and it was only several feet away. And of course, the body was under just several inches of dirt.
Lorie's visions are accurate about all the important details of the case. The brothers' involvement, the larger car the body had been moved in, Alexis's body buried in a shallow grave near water, and about John keeping an eye on the site.
He was able to keep an eye on the situation because he went there every single day.
But John Burke still isn't in custody. Because he was out of town, he is oblivious to the discovery of the body.
As it was, John showed up the next day and he was totally in the dark, and by the time he found out about it, it was too late. And I told him he was under arrest for the murder of his wife, and I put on a pair of brand new handcuffs on him. That felt really good.
John Burke is convicted of his wife's murder and sentenced to 13 years in jail. His brother Kelly gets off scot-free because he cooperated with police. With this murder solved, Detective Bob Lee isn't quite as flippant about Lorie's psychic abilities.
I contacted Lorie to tell her, all about the case and how terrifically accurate she was at that point on 28 of the 30 things that she had told me.
I don't know if I feel vindicated so much as I just feel, yes, this stuff does work. And it's important for me to be right, not just for me, but I think it's important for the victim.
Psychic Lorie may be good at predicting the future, but not when it comes to herself. Detective Lee was so impressed with her abilities, he proposed marriage.
I never for a heartbeat thought when I met him that I was going to end up with him.
We've been married now for a little over 18 years. We're a good team.
July 1973, New Haven, Connecticut. In broad daylight, a young woman is brutally murdered in a downtown parking garage. Witnesses see the suspect escape. Forensics discover a trail of evidence, including blood and fingerprints. But it's not enough to capture the killer. Police turn to the world of the paranormal to help solve the case. A psychic's cryptic clues create more questions than answers. But will they catch the murderer and bring solace to a town cloaked in fear? July 16th, 1973, New Haven, Connecticut. Penny Sarah is a 21-year-old dental assistant. In her high school yearbook, she describes herself as having a laughing heart and merry spirit. Since her mother passed away 10 years earlier, she's been a constant support to her father and young sister. On this day, she's taken time off work to go shopping for furniture. She pulls in on the top floor of Temple Street parking garage. She gets out, and before there's time to lock the car, she's attacked. In the struggle, the attacker's hand is cut. The young woman manages to escape to a stairwell, but her assailant corners her and stabs her through the heart. As far as Detective George Mazzacane was concerned, this case was going to be a piece of cake.
We had 5 people who had witnessed the portions of the incident as it occurred. We had the blood type, we had fingerprints, we had everything but his name and address.
Police even had a suspect, Penny's on-off boyfriend. Within hours of the murder, the man is brought in for questioning, and an eyewitness picks him out of a lineup.
However, he had an ironclad alibi. He had in excess of 12 witnesses who put him in a restaurant at a grill cooking.
With the release of the boyfriend, Mazzacane drew his own conclusion.
It was a random assault, and that this individual probably had a criminal record.
If Mazzacane is right, and it was a random act of violence, then there's little hope of a quick conviction. Meanwhile, the forensics team scour Penny's car for clues. Although the technology was pretty basic back in the 70s, they uncover a wealth of evidence.
There was a tissue box on the back seat, and there was a fingerprint on the tissue box. And then we found a handkerchief with the same blood on it, same type blood. Aside from the blood, there was Freon, which is used as a propellant in spray paint and auto body, and there was mechanics grease.
Freon, spray paint, and grease. It doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to figure it out. This is someone who gets his hands dirty working with cars. Mazzacane checks out hundreds of local mechanics, but he can't match the fingerprint. Overnight, New Haven becomes a ghost town. Women are afraid to go anywhere alone. Weeks turn into months. Live leads become dead ends. Mazzacane is frustrated and getting desperate. He makes a decision that most people might consider highly unusual. He decides to bring a psychic on board.
When you got to a point where an investigation becomes dead and you want to jumpstart it, you certainly would revert to a psychic.
Mazzacane gets in touch with Mary Pasquarella Downey, a psychic and time walker. She brings a new dimension to the investigation. For most people, the notion of time is just that, a notion, a means of measuring fragments of our lives. For Mary, time is personified, and she can talk to it.
When I discuss time as a time walker, time surrounds us, past, present, and future. Can't change time. You can move it around and play with it, but you can't change it. But the present past is something that's available. It's like a large library. If I'm dealing with time, it's like you pick a string up and then you begin to wind it like a ball. And the more you wind it, the larger the ball gets and the more information you compile. Time is like a moving camera. It takes pictures and retains things. And if you listen very carefully, time is like a verbal library. It gives you information. It defines things for you. Somebody asked me once what my impression was of time. And my impression of time is it's like a large ocean with lots of thought patterns that are boats floating in it. And if you really want to deal with it, you swim out to the boat, climb aboard, and gain whatever information you can get from that little boat. If I get an impression from time of a face, I'll draw a face.
Mary's drawing is similar to an eyewitness description of the killer, but it's not enough to nail him. She does, however, provide some important but cryptic clues.
I just knew blue was extremely important to the case because it kept repeating itself. It says blue is important, blue is important.
Blue, I said, what does blue tell me? Blue, well, let's think about this. I'm talking to myself. The car was blue. The incident occurred on the 8th and 10th level. Is there any blue up there? No. What does blue tell me? Was he wearing blue clothes? Did he have blue shoes on or a blue hat? No. Okay, so we'll file that. Blue.
Sure, the car was blue, and Penny's dress was blue, but it doesn't identify the killer.
I got the odor of oil, or like you would smell in a garage. So I tied that to the person and said to myself, oh, this must be somebody that's a mechanic.
Amazingly, Mary had picked up on the mechanic connection. The fact that Mazzacane had been pursuing the possibility that a mechanic was involved had never been released to the public. And then the psychic provided a third cryptic clue.
Water kept repeating itself, and I thought to myself, well, this is New Haven. It's a harbor. You're surrounded by water. At that point, I thought, well, water's important to tell me that it happened here in New Haven. And I let it go at that.
Another non-starter. Doesn't every psychic see water?
I said, this is frustrating. She says, well, I can't tell you anything. I guess I was looking for some kind of an answer to the crime, to put me on, and she said, no, I don't do that.
Mary wouldn't be able to provide the detective with the kind of answers that he was looking for, but she did have insight into the problems with the case.
But I did say blood would tell, that the case would not be solved for years and years and years because the person was somebody that would just slip, very ordinary, and slip right through the cracks. And so it would be years before, but don't give up because blood would tell. I had no idea what that sentence meant at that time.
I said, do I have to wait for this guy to commit a crime? And then we go back to work? And she said, no, it's not going to be like that. She said, it's going to be a long time from now. So I said, oh, that's not very encouraging to myself, you know. No, I've got to prove her wrong or discard all her information or comments at that point.
It looked like the case would never be solved, but there was one man who was determined not to let that happen. Detective George Mezzacane was hunting down the brutal killer of Penny Sarah. When he reached a dead end, he sought the help of professional psychic Mary Pasquarella Downey. Mary insisted that the killer would eventually be caught, but the visual clues she provided were vague. The color blue and a sense of water were not hard evidence. Certainly not something he'd want to share with his superiors.
I never committed this to writing because it would look like nonsense. And then one time I mentioned something in the detective division to someone, and the chief inspector said to me, you're not reading tea leaves anymore, are you? He said, I said, no. He said, well, when you get through with that, he says, I want you to go out and take care of something, get back to doing good old-fashioned police work.
Mezzacane decided to ignore the ridicule of his superior and continue working with Mary for two reasons. Firstly, conventional police work had yielded no positive results. Secondly, he was under pressure from Penny's father, John.
She said, I want to get more information on Penny. I want to hold one of her objects. Did you bring anything with you? I said, no. She said, well, I need some significant part of clothing. The dress she wore that day. I said, I'll get something. So I went back after this was a brief conversation. And I was interested, but I wasn't, I didn't have anything to chew on, you know? It was like, you know, like a light beer, I guess. Everything you wanted and less, you know? I guess they have to characterize it that way, you know? There's a lot there, but... And I wasn't surprised. I was interested.
For their second meeting, Mezzacane brought Penny's father along. John Sarah had campaigned to keep this case alive from day one. Every week, he placed ads in local papers in an attempt to find the killer.
He did not want it put on the shelf and wait 20 years for someone to come in and confess to a crime. He wanted to know that there was somebody working on this case every day. And that was his mission, and he accomplished that.
Mezzacane also brought a favorite coat of Penny's. The process of psychic reading through an object is known as psychometry.
When you walk into a house, you either get a good feeling or a bad feeling. When you meet somebody, you either like them or you're wary of them. That's your energy reaching out to protect you. And it's exactly the same as any viewer that's out there has had the deja vu, that's met somebody and been cautious, that's gone into a house and couldn't wait to get out. I mean, this is psychometry. That's the world of psychometry. It's energy speaking.
She began to talk about Penny and what kind of a woman she was and what she thought had happened, and kind of recapped what she had told me.
The only thing that we did get from that was that I knew very well that it was somebody that had never seen her before, had nothing to do with her, and that it was just a chance occurrence. Wrong place, wrong time.
Mezzacane's suspicions are confirmed. Right from the start, he also felt the killing was random. After the session, Mezzacane and Penny's father had their own meeting.
I said, what do you think after we left? I said, did you feel comfortable? Did you think she's a quack? Where did she get all this information? How did she? He says, I don't know. He said, but she's good. He said, I believe her. He said, if she can help, I'd like her involved. So I said, okay. She had suggested that she wanted to go to the crime scene and get some impressions of the person who did this. So he was all for that. He said, sure. And I thought it was a good idea. We'd come this far. Why leave that part undone?
It's been over a year since Penny Sarah was murdered. Conventional police work has produced nothing. Out of sheer desperation, Matsakane continues to put his faith in Mary.
And this is actually where it happened?
Yes, right in this area here was where she bolted from the car and ran.
Can this odd couple manage to grasp some psychic evidence from the crime scene and not only capture a brutal killer, but bring some solace to a heartbroken father?
What witnesses said, he chased her up this way and then she ran. She was looking around. She said, I've got a terrible headache. She says, I'm getting an awful headache on this side. I said to myself, what has that got to do with anything? Where's that going to lead me? Why was she getting a headache in the area where this guy was standing, where he was observed? Is there a logical explanation for that?
When we got to the garage, the perpetrator began to become more clear to me as far as what he was like and who he was. So basically, I saw him in a uniform. I smelled the gas. I knew that he worked with a garage. I saw him wiping his hands on an oily rag, and I saw a uniform with a name tag with the letter E on it. And I knew that he worked in a garage. He was probably a mechanic. He was thin. He was wiry. He weighed maybe 160, 65 pounds tops, and that he had the injury to his head.
I mean, that's a lot to digest and sleep on. I mean, you'd be talking in your sleep if you got hit with all that at once.
For Matsakane, returning to the crime scene raises more questions than answers.
My primary questions were what actually did happen and what really was in this man's mind at the time of this murder. And that's what this revisiting stirs in me.
While we were in the garage, one of the things that was you were very aware of is that you're dealing with a girl that was very lovely. Penny Sarah was like a little rainbow. She reminds me so much of one of my children. Logical, reasonable, common sense, sweet and understanding. You could picture her fighting to stay alive. That was the one thing that really began to get to me, is I knew she fought to stay alive. And that really disturbed me. And I wondered why hadn't anybody heard her, because I know she would have cried out.
I don't want to make this sound like I had a religious experience. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. It was just a feeling that I had. I felt that she was getting information from a gift that she had. And I never felt that with another person in my life before, and I've worked with some psychics before, and I've worked with some after, and I never got that feeling, you know, that I was going to get help or I was going to get that kind of, you know, it never happened again.
From the very onset of getting the case, I knew that blue was extremely important. Blue, 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 kept repeating. And then as we approached the garage, I knew that where we were going would be the blue floor. So as we entered the garage and George was driving up, I noted that there were numbers on the floor. So I thought I was wrong.
Later on, I checked with one of the attendants, and he did say that years ago, they did color code the floors, but then they changed it to a numeric format.
So I was right.
So she was right.
So I was right,
Yeah.
and then it was blue.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Another confirmation.
I had the feeling that this woman knew something. And I honestly thought that she was going to tell me who did it. Go get this guy, here's his name. I wrote it down and his address. It was scary in that someone could know that kind of information and not have enough to take you over the top. That was frustrating.
Mary's visit to the parking garage had produced several new clues. However, every psychic has their limit.
I'm not involved beyond the point of my first initial investigation. There are a lot of psychics that have the same philosophy that I have, that we are not going to solve a murder case. We are not police. We are going to be an informant, somebody that informs them of something that might be, that they may have missed or not paid attention to. A good psychic will only do what they're asked to do and nothing more, and walk away.
Detective Mazzacane continues working on the Penny Sarah case. Years pass with no significant progress. Then, in 1979, Mazzacane decides that he too has reached his limit. After 17 years with the New Haven Police Department, the detective retires.
I just hit a stone wall, I think. I just hit the wall. And I was getting totally consumed with this. And Mary had given me all these leads, but I needed something to put everything together, and I just couldn't. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying that it got to a point where I just, I didn't feel like I was useful anymore.
With Mazzacane out of the picture, one of Mary's predictions has already come true. 5 years have passed since the murder, and the case still hasn't been solved. In fact, it would be another 6 years before there's a break in the case. A woman calls the police and claims that her husband threatened to do the same thing to her as he'd done to Penny Sarah. The man is arrested and charged with Penny's murder. Is this the man Mary Downey saw in her visions? Will John Sarah finally get justice? Because although it's been 11 years, the statute of limitations doesn't apply to murder. After one of the largest homicide investigations in New Haven history, a suspect is about to go on trial for the murder of Penny Sarah. Before a word of evidence is heard, the retired detective who spent 5 years working the case has reached his own verdict.
I just knew he was not guilty. We had already checked this guy out 3 or 4 years ago. He had an alibi, he was working that day.
Mazzacane was right. On the eve of the trial, the prosecutor made a startling announcement. The suspect's blood was type A. The blood found at the crime scene was type O. Case dismissed. The man was fully exonerated, but the damage was done. His life would never be the same. It's only in movies the wrongly accused walk away smiling. Once again, the Penny Sarah case goes cold. Years pass. Fortunately for this case and many others, in the early 90s, the landscape of police work in America would change forever with the creation of a computerized fingerprint database. One of the first prints uploaded onto the new system is from the box of tissues found in Penny Sarah's car. Because of the backlog with the new system, it took 3 years to find a match. The guy's name, Grant. First name, Edward.
And I saw a uniform with a name tag with the letter E on it.
The letter E for Edward, exactly as Mary predicted, and at one point Grant had fixed cars for a living, another prediction of Mary's that proved absolutely accurate. Grant had been arrested in 1994 on a domestic violence rap. He had no prior convictions.
The person was somebody that would just slip, very ordinary, and slip right through the cracks.
Once again, Mary was spot on. For all intents and purposes, Grant was a clean-living, nondescript citizen.
Don't give up because blood would tell.
Mary Downey couldn't possibly have known what blood would tell meant, because when she predicted it more than 20 years ago, forensic DNA technology didn't exist. And it transpired that on the day of the murder, Grant had been to the nearby Veterans Administration Hospital to receive treatment for an old head injury.
This guy's got 3 plates in his head. 30 years later, you find she was getting his headache. She was telling me this almost 30 years earlier.
All of psychic Mary Downey's predictions had hit the mark. But what about the vision of water, the one clue both Matsukane and Mary dismissed? It turns out Grant lived in the nearby town of Waterbury. As for Grant, the fingerprint match allowed police to get a blood sample so that his DNA could be compared to blood found at the crime scene. It, too, was a positive match.
I just couldn't believe it, but I could believe it. And I knew it was him.
On Thursday, June 24th, 1999, almost 26 years after the crime was committed, Edward R. Grant was arrested for the murder of Penny Sarah. In September 2002, he was sentenced to serve 20 years in prison. He won't be eligible for parole until he's 80 years old. Up to the end, Grant maintained his innocence, so we may never know why Penny Sarah was murdered. The tragic irony of this story is that Penny's father, John Sarah, a man who had devoted more than 20 years of his life trying to help bring the killer to justice, died just 8 months before Grant was caught.
I could see John going to heaven and saying to God, "Now listen, God, it's been all these years, and Mary said this was going to be solved, so I want it solved." And God said, "Okay, we'll take care of it." And that's what happened.
They say truth is stranger than fiction. And in this case, the truth was very, very strange.
December 1998, Lindsay Quai vanishes on Christmas Day. A police missing persons inquiry fails, and a family is torn apart. But a visitor from beyond the grave appears to a psychic in a nightmarish vision.
She told me she'd been carnaged and mangled. She was trying to tell us that she'd been brutally murdered. Then she flashed the railway line. I could see the railway track, and I feel that's where she was telling me this is where she had been killed. And it was for me to go and help her.
Is Lindsay missing, or is she dead? And can a psychic discover the truth behind her disappearance? Southport, northwest England, deserted now, but every summer this seaside town attracts millions of visitors. Most come to breathe in the sea air, stretch out on the miles of empty beaches and enjoy the thrills of the roller coaster. But this man is no tourist. He is psychic Joe Power, and he's been drawn here by a missing girl and a nightmare he will never forget. The story starts here in December 1998. Lindsay Quai is a 21-year-old wife and mother of 2 small children.
Lindsay was a very kind person, do anything for anybody. Good mother.
The Quais are just an average family preparing for the holidays, but on Christmas Day 1998, their lives change forever when Lindsay mysteriously vanishes. Days turn into weeks, and weeks turn into months, and still nobody hears from Lindsay. Her family begin to suspect that something is very wrong.
Well, you know, anyone goes missing in your family, it's just undescribable, the feelings you get. Everyone was worrying, and our brains were going, swirling. We weren't sleeping, we weren't eating. It was just a great worry.
In February, Southport police take a statement from Lindsay's distraught husband, Mitchell.
He said that she'd gone out drinking with her friends and that she'd stayed out all night and he'd been left alone with the 2 children in the house and had woken with them on his own on Christmas Day, and went on to say that Lindsay had arrived later on the Christmas morning, still under the influence of drink, went into a shower, didn't say anything, got a few clothes together and then left without saying anything to the children. Sometime in the January, he'd seen her in a vehicle with a guy who he didn't know at a junction in Southport somewhere, and he presumed that she'd just started a new life.
Since then, nobody has seen or heard from Lindsay. Police class her as a missing person and, working with her husband Mitchell, start a high-profile nationwide appeal for her return.
We had a press conference, which he attended, and he reiterated the story that he'd given to the police.
She came in the morning, she was out of her face. She came in at 7 o'clock in the morning. She went straight up to bed and I got the kids up then, opened the presents up. She showed no kind of interest in the kids on Christmas Day. We'd had trouble in our relationship and we decided to separate before Christmas. But we were going to stay together through Christmas. I thought I was going to leave after New Year, but she's up and left before then.
Lindsay's father, Peter Wilson, makes an appeal to his daughter.
I just say, you know, if Lindsay's watching this, no one's blaming her for what she's done, you know, leaving the children. And we'd like to contact the police as soon as possible.
Psychic Joe Power has been following the case in the press, but late one night in February, he has a nightmare that he thinks is a message from the spirit world.
I'd gone to sleep. It was like any ordinary night. During my sleep, I heard a phone ring and 2 people appeared to me.
Joe recognizes the woman from the newspapers as housewife Lindsay Quai, but police think she is a missing person. Joe claims that the spirit of Lindsay is trying to tell him she's been murdered, who her killer is, and where to find her body.
Lindsay Quai told me she had been carnaged and mangled.
Joe's vision is incredibly violent and shocks him to this day.
And then she told me for the police to search the railway, and also as well, the police must search the fairgrounds.
But why did Lindsay want these 2 areas searched? As the images intensify, Joe receives more information.
I heard McDowell's, and I actually seen McDowell's, so I was hearing it and I was seeing it. And I also heard her say tractors.
Joe is confused and distressed by his vision. He turns to friend, retired police support worker Frida Valentine, for advice.
He started telling me that he'd been visited by Lindsay Quai in a dream, and she said, "Please help me. I am desperate for somebody to recognize that I have been murdered. I am not a missing person."
Frida is shocked by what Joe tells her.
I think he really believed that she had been cut up. With him saying about the mangled carnage, it more or less looked as though they couldn't see or recognize any parts of the body.
Joe also tells Frida where he thinks Lindsay might be buried.
He told me that he'd been shown the railway track and also the fairground in Southport. I suggested to Joe that he go to the police and give all this information.
Reluctantly, Joe follows Frida's advice.
I was absolutely terrified going into a police station. I thought they would think I was the murderer, going in with so much detailed and accurate information.
But no detectives from the Missing Persons Inquiry team is available, so Joe gives a full statement to another officer.
And she reassured me that that information would be passed on to the officers in charge.
If information comes in from a psychic or a medium that we feel can be corroborated or will send us in a certain direction, then my view is that we will always utilise that if it helps us. But the problem with that is that quite often it's not supported by any tangible evidence.
Joe never hears back from the police regarding his statement. As far as they're concerned, this is still a missing persons case.
But it was very frustrating to me because at that time I knew this was a murder case and not a missing persons.
Joe is determined to discover more about Lindsay Quai's mysterious disappearance. Has she been killed? Was she buried in the fairground or the railway? And could Joe convince the police Lindsay is not a missing person and a killer is walking free? A young mother, Lindsay Quai, has gone missing. Police have no clue to her whereabouts. Her husband has appealed for her safe return, but in a terrifying vision, psychic Joe Power sees a woman being killed and dismembered. Is this Lindsay? Should police be hunting a murderer? Joe is determined to find out.
I felt I had to investigate this case myself because the police were not listening, and I felt I had a sense of duty to get this young lady's remains found.
Joe drives to Southport. He has no map and he doesn't know the area. All he has is his confusing list of locations from Lindsay. The railway, the fairground, McDowell's, and a tractor yard. After hours in the car, Joe is tired and lost. He's convinced his psychic connection to Lindsay has failed until he reaches a certain road completely by chance.
It was just around this part here that I heard a voice crystal clear, and a sudden noise shouted, "Stop!"
And I turned to the right, pulled up the car, and for no apparent reason at all is that the car horn started to go off. I got out of the car, pulled the bonnet, eventually it went off.
And I got back in the car and I decided, with the car horn going off, that I'd get away from the area because of the neighbours and the sound, and I felt really quite frightened at that stage.
And I drove around on the next street. But just before I'd actually got to the bottom of the road, there was a place called McDowell's that was on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side was another place full of tractors.
That's when it all sunk into me that this is where she had actually sent me.
Both the tractor yard and McDowell's are on Stamford Road, the very road where Lindsay lived with husband Mitchell and her 2 children. Joe is now convinced that the woman who appeared to him was Lindsay Quai. But why is she drawing him here?
After I left the area, I felt shocked, I felt disturbed, but I also felt, it's strange to say this, is reassurance in the images that I had actually received.
Once again, Joe decides to contact the police. This time, he writes a letter to the head of the missing person investigation, Bob Marsden.
I wrote to Bob Marsden and told him that I was no ordinary person. I was doing this because this young lady had appeared to me, and this case needs to be looked at in more detail.
Joe receives this receipt for his letter, but the police do not call.
I believe Joe was getting very, very frustrated because he'd informed all the police, and yet they still believed that she was actually missing.
Sometime after Joe's letter arrived at Southport Police Headquarters, a review of the missing persons inquiry is ordered. Detective Superintendent Jeff Sloan is brought in to re-examine all the evidence. Immediately, his instincts as a police officer tell him something is not right.
There was a lot of circumstantial evidence which tended towards the fact that Lindsay was not alive. We couldn't establish any proof of life.
Lindsay hasn't used her bank account since before Christmas. She hasn't applied for income support or housing benefit. Vital medical appointments have been missed, and she has had no contact with her family, not the actions of either a runaway or a loving mother.
When I read through the documents and I read through the lifestyle and some of the issues that emanated from that missing from home inquiry, I formed the opinion quite quickly that this actually should be a murder inquiry. I felt that Lindsay had been murdered.
Joe Power is no longer alone in his belief that Lindsay has been killed.
It's very frustrating, you know, knowing that this young lady had been carned and mangled, and you have to sit there and wait for her to be found.
Detective Superintendent Jeff Sloan is placed in charge of the new murder inquiry, but this isn't going to be an easy case to crack.
It's very frustrating not to have a body because when you have a body, that's where your lines of inquiry start to develop. All we had was 22 Stamford Road, which was Lindsay's home address, where she'd lived with Mitchell. Well, the very first thing that we do is to go back and fully search the house again, the gardens and the area immediately surrounding the house.
Using the house as their starting point, the police begin one of the largest searches ever conducted in mainland England.
And we actually used officers from the Royal Air Force, the JARIC, which is a reconnaissance organisation, who flew over and could detect any recently disturbed ground. And if they highlighted any areas, then we would send a specialist search team to go and excavate.
It's an agonizing time for Lindsay's family.
We're by the phone 24/7, and sometimes we get false information where bones had been found at one time. And we were given the information, then we found out it was a pig, a dead pig. And then when you heard about a body being found and this, that, and the other, one was found in the River Ribble, I think, you wondered if that was Lindsay. It's never ending.
But the police failed to find any evidence of Lindsay.
I was concerned that we hadn't found a body, and I was at a loss as to where we would look to next, and took the decision that we wouldn't undertake any more searches or digging until it was based on intelligence that we had through. But it was frustrating for me.
The police are forced to suspend all searches, but Lindsay's parents refuse to give up hope. They spend every waking moment looking for their daughter.
Well, we searched in canals, rivers, we got stung by bees, hornets, you name it. But, I used to be up to my neck sometimes in freezing cold water. We couldn't stop. It was just our way of contributing towards finding Lindsay.
With the police search on hold and no new information coming forward, it looks as if Lindsay's body may never be found and the case remain unsolved. But Psychic Joe Power believes this is something the spirit world would never allow. Joe thinks Lindsay's spirit is unable to rest, as once again she appears to him with a message from beyond the grave.
The second time Lindsay appeared to me was at my home address, and she came to me and told me that the police were not listening to the information that I had previously provided to them.
Joe's first vision led him to Lindsay's house. Now he returns to Southport to search the fairground and railway track. He has a feeling that these areas are in some way connected to her disappearance. He starts at the railway track. Joe doesn't know what he should be looking for. He's hoping his psychic powers will be his guide.
When I walked along this particular part of the railway line, my hair stood up on my hand and I heard a voice. I believe that was Lindsay telling me is that she was in this location.
But if Lindsay is buried at the railway, why does Joe want the police to search the fairground as well?
It was quite clear to me is that this young lady's remains were in two separate locations.
But Joe Power fails to find any evidence that Lindsay is in this location. For Detective Superintendent Sloan, the case is equally baffling, with no new leads coming in. He decides to re-examine the original witness testimonies. He wants to build a picture of Lindsay's last known movements.
We believe Lindsay had been shopping on the 15th of December and had actually made a call to the benefits agency, and she made an inquiry about a missing cheque, which should have been issued in the November. As a result of that conversation, she was sent out a disclaimer form, which was never ever received and never ever recovered by the police. It was after that phone call, basically, that Lindsay ceased to exist.
Detective Superintendent Sloan discovers that the only person who claims to have seen Lindsay alive after December 16th was her husband, Mitchell Quai. He told police she left him and abandoned her children on Christmas Day. Detective Superintendent Sloan is suspicious. He has a feeling Mitchell's statement doesn't ring true. It doesn't fit with the profile he has built of Lindsay.
Given the background of Lindsay, what her upbringing was, the way she was interacted with her children, that there was no way she would have walked out on her children on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day.
Police take a closer look at Lindsay and Mitchell's relationship.
Mitchell was very violent towards Lindsay over a number of years, and ultimately she did try to institute divorce proceedings from him. But the issue was then that she'd always accepted Mitchell back and they'd always be reconciled.
Could Mitchell really be her killer? Was this why Lindsay's spirit led Joe to her road? Was she trying to tell him that this was the murder scene? It's been 9 months since Lindsay Quai disappeared in Southport, northwest England. Detective Superintendent Jeff Sloan believes that Lindsay has been murdered, just as psychic Joe Powers said over 7 months earlier. Joe's nightmarish vision had started a psychic investigation that took him to Southport Fairground, the railway track, and Lindsay's own home. But what significance did these locations have? All is to be revealed as police close in on their prime suspect, Lindsay's husband, Mitchell Quai.
Well, Mitchell portrayed an image of he was the abandoned father, the abandoned husband, and that, sadly for us, he was very plausible in front of the media. He was very confident, overconfident sometimes. He seemed to be reaching out to the community, and a lot of people seemed to be believing him and formed the opinion that perhaps the police were just picking him out because he seemed the obvious candidate for a suspect.
In June 2000, Detective Superintendent Jeff Sloan trusts his instincts and arrests Mitchell Quai on suspicion of murdering his 21-year-old wife, Lindsay.
Well, Mitchell was an egotist, and I actually felt that he formed the opinion that he could get away with this because of the time element and the fact that the media had shown such an interest in him, and various members of the community were sympathetic to him.
But despite hours of questioning, Mitchell refuses to crack. Detective Superintendent Sloan is convinced that he has his man, but he doesn't have enough evidence to press charges. It looks like Mitchell is about to walk.
Basically stuck to his story, but when we listened to the interviews, his responses and his replies, I got from the psychologist that we were starting really to get to him and he was becoming quite low and down in this. And I think the telling point came when I gave instructions within his hearing that his father was to be charged and so was his brother.
Phone records show that at key points in the investigation, Mitchell made an unusually large number of calls to his brother Elliot and his father. This was totally out of character, and Detective Superintendent Sloan thought it pointed to their involvement.
The arrest of Elliot and the subsequent arrest of Mitchell's father had quite a pronounced impact on Mitchell because I think he felt that he'd actually succeeded in convincing members of the public, the press, and to a certain degree the police, that he was right and that Lindsay had just disappeared. He thought it would go away. And I got the impression that when he realised that we did mean business and that they too had been arrested, that reality started to creep in, and the realisation was that he wasn't going to get away with it. I made the decision that I was going to charge Mitchell with murder, and within a very, very short space of time, I was contacted on my mobile to tell me that Mitchell had actually admitted that he had in fact killed Lindsay.
Over a year after Lindsay Quai first went missing, the truth surrounding her disappearance is finally uncovered.
The last few hours of Lindsay's life all centred around the cheque that had gone missing in November. Mitchell, at some stage, tried to encash that cheque. There's a row developed over that, and he's lost his control and he's strangled her.
As Mitchell's confession continues, the true horrific nature of the crime is revealed.
And that's when he recruited Elliot to come in and to help him to dispose of the body. And that's when he decided that he and Elliot would cut the body up in the bath with the children asleep in bed in the next room, which I thought was horrific.
The images of violence in Joe's dream were now explained. Lindsay was dismembered, just as Joe had said. And the scene of the crime? Lindsay's house on Stamford Road, the very place Joe had been led to 12 months earlier. How did he know these facts?
I knew 100% I'd been right all the time. It was a very emotional case and a very upsetting case.
Mitchell Quai leads police officers to the locations where he buried his wife's remains.
Lindsay's torso was found near to the Pleasureland theme park at Southport, behind a go-kart racing track where Mitchell used to work. We found Lindsay's legs on the railway embankment, which was near to one of the first places they resided together.
Joe had asked for these locations to be searched over 12 months earlier.
I knew straight away. It didn't come as a surprise for me. What you've got to remember is how powerful these images, what she had shown to me. She'd already shown me the fairground. She'd shown me the railway.
But unfortunately for Joe, at that time he was working alone. He never did receive the call to help the police. But Joe believes there is one person who recognizes the part he played in this case.
Lindsay briefly appeared to me after her remains were actually found, and I heard her say thank you, and there was no more contact from this young lady.
On January 16th, 2001, Mitchell Quai is sentenced.
Mitchell was sentenced to a mandatory life term of imprisonment with a tariff of 18 years because of the severity of the way he disposed of his wife, Lindsay.
Elliot Quai receives 7 years for his part in the gruesome murder. Mitchell's father is released without charge.
This case was extremely difficult to crack, not least because of the way that she was murdered, the way she was disposed of, and the way that he behaved after the murder, actually actively seeking the press and seeking public opinion on his side and sympathy.
Detective Superintendent Sloan receives a special commendation for the integral part he played in the capture and conviction of this most devious of killers. Joe Power's personal investigation is as yet unrecognized.
When the killers were caught, I was very satisfied that I'd done my job. All the detail and all the information that had been provided made me feel very, very satisfied, not only just for me, but for Lindsay Quai's parents as well. It was a very emotional case and a very upsetting case.
To lose Lindsay that way has affected everybody, the whole family, me included. Never going to be the same again. Still suffering now, we'll be suffering until the day we die. Peter, my eldest son, hung himself in the loft at my house. Could never get over the fact of what they did to Lindsay after they'd murdered her. That's what led to his suicide.
2 years after her vicious murder, Lindsay is finally able to rest in peace. But she leaves behind a family torn apart by tragedy.
Mitchell's taken my daughter. He's taken Robin and Jack's mother. He's taken my son, Peter, because I blame him for that as well. He's taken a lot off the family, which we'll never forgive him for.
Pub landlord Mick Hughes is ferociously attacked in the living quarters above his bar. He's battered and beaten over the head and left bleeding to die. After hundreds of hours of investigation, the police are baffled. They just don't have enough evidence to make an arrest.
There was a feeling of a marathon about that inquiry.
Local psychic Angela McGee visits the scene of the crime.
I could see a vision of Mick's body lying under the window. Actually could see his injuries.
Her spirit allies show her the terrible truth.
I got this awful shudder through me. And I realised then that I was actually looking at the culprit.
Can Angela's supernatural visions help bring the brutal killer to justice? Sunday, April 27th, 2003. Police race towards the quiet village of Pelsall near Birmingham, towards the Royal Oak pub. Staff arriving for work have found the body of the landlord, Mick Hughes, brutally bludgeoned to death. Detective Inspector Ian Bamber and Detective Constable Mike Crump have the job of catching the killer.
Mick's body was found in his private bedroom area that was on the first floor of the pub.
He had sustained serious head injuries consistent with him being struck with an object.
The attack had been ferocious, sustained, and really malicious. If offenders had meant to incapacitate him, to render him unconscious or knock him out, you could have easily done that with 1 or 2 blows. But no, they hit him again and again and again. The bedroom upstairs where Mick slept was ransacked.
All the early indications suggested was that it had been a burglary that had gone drastically wrong.
Michael Hughes was a family man, just 2 months away from his 60th birthday. His daughter Sharon is devastated by the news.
You see it on TV, but until you've actually lived it, you can't describe how it destroys you as a person and as a family. You really can't. They asked me and my sister if we could go down to the morgue and identify my dad's body. It was the worst thing I've ever had to do in my life.
Sharon and her family are desperate for justice. But despite weeks of intensive forensic investigation and hundreds of interviews with local people, the police cannot find any conclusive evidence. A neighboring publican decides to call in psychic medium Angela McGee.
I had a phone call from a friend and she asked me to go down to help with the local murder. And my reaction was, what if they don't believe, you know? I'm not going to go down there and look stupid. I said, I'll wait till I get a message through spirit. I'll wait till the right moment.
Within days, that moment comes.
Well, I had a message from my own father in spirit. It was him that actually told me to go. He said, what about this murder? What about this murder? And then I knew I had to go. I believe that mediumship, you are an instrument of the spirit world. It's not voluntary. You just do what you have to do.
Angela drives to the Royal Oak pub. She's never been here before and knows nothing about the murder, but that is about to change.
I sat there in meditation for a little while, said my prayers, and put my hands up and said, dear God, what have I got to tell these people? With that, I had a vision. I saw 3 men climbing up a black fire escape staircase, over the roof, over the railings, and in through the French windows. And I thought to myself, that is where they've got in this building.
Emboldened by her vision, Angela decides to go in. She is greeted by Beryl Chapman, former partner of Mick Hughes, who is looking after the Royal Oak. Beryl shows Angela to the living quarters of the pub. She stands in the hall. Then suddenly she is shown a second vision.
I could see bodies struggling, as if there was a real push-pull-you type thing going on, and there was blood. It was just a flash, literally a flash, a vision.
Angela goes to the bedroom where Mick met his grisly fate. As she moves into the room, Spirit sends her another terrifying glimpse of the past.
Again, another flash, a vision. I could see a vision of Mick's body lying under the window. Actually could see his injuries in his head and down the one side.
Now Angela sees something wonderful.
Then all of a sudden, I saw Mick in my mind's eye.
The spirit of the dead publican appears standing before her.
And he was making a point of a thick gold chain bracelet which was holding up.
Mick tells Angela that his killer also stole his bracelet.
Mick said that he knew that person, he had drunk with that person, he had fished with that person, he knew that person very, very well. I felt totally aghast. I just thought, take a deep breath here. I can't believe what I've just heard.
It's an astonishing revelation. But before Angela can react, she has another vision. 3 men running away.
It's almost as if they've rushed past me, and if I could feel their panic. But one of them had something the size of a shoebox with him. That's all I saw.
Angela has never experienced such an incredible barrage of visions, but as she leaves the pub, she has the most terrifying insight of all.
As I walked through the pub, I glanced at the bar, and there behind the bar was a young man pulling pints. I got this awful shudder through me, complete coldness. I just felt that there was complete emptiness there, as if it got no soul. And I realised then that I was actually looking at the culprit.
Not waiting to see his face, Angela runs from the pub. If she's correct, the killer is still right under the noses of the police. Landlord Mick Hughes has been brutally murdered above his pub, the Royal Oak, by person or persons unknown. Psychic Angela McGee has visited the scene of the crime. Her spirit allies sent her an astonishing series of visions containing clues about the murder.
I saw the vision of 3 men going up to the backfire escape staircase. I then saw Mick's body. I saw Mick himself. I saw 3 men leaving with something the size of a shoebox. I glanced at the bar, and I realised then that I was actually looking at the culprit.
Despite months of painstaking investigation, the police still don't have enough solid evidence to make an arrest.
And when there was a feeling of a marathon about that inquiry.
There was a great deal of information coming in that was being looked at, but little that was helping us to get to the bottom of what had actually happened.
The police are running out of options when fate leads them to Angela.
In the course of my inquiries, I met a woman who had met Angela McGee at one of her psychic meetings. This woman stated that Angela had discussed the murder with her.
We decided that whilst the evidential opportunities might be limited, it would really be foolhardy and a bit ignorant not to at least go and speak to Angela.
Mike Crump and a colleague go to Angela's house to interview her.
She invited us in. She made us a cup of tea, and we spoke to Angela about what she knew.
Angela tells the police about her vision on the fire escape and of the body in the bedroom. She had no way of knowing these things, but her account matches closely what police found in forensic examination.
I was startled and sceptical, equally curious and intrigued.
Now she really begins to surprise the police.
She claimed that 3 men had been involved in the murder and that one of those men had known Michael Hughes.
It sounds incredible, but Angela's information fits with a number of theories the police are working on.
To put numbers on offenders raised some eyebrows, but from analysing the scene and trying to generate some hypotheses around what had happened, I think we were all fairly comfortable that it was more than one.
She'd had a vision of them running away, one of them carrying a shoebox-shaped object.
The police know what Angela does not, that a safe the size of a shoebox was taken from the pub.
We clearly knew that the safe had been ripped from its housing, so to hear Angela describe a box-shaped object being carried by a man was fascinating.
Angela's visions confirm facts the police already know or things they suspect.
Her account fitted in on a number of features with the hypotheses that we were running on. The difficulty for us was trying to match any evidential facts that we knew about with Angela's vision.
At the time of speaking to Angela, I was a little cynical and sceptical about the information she was providing, but in the fullness of time it was quite surprising how accurate some of the information she provided turned out to be.
Angela has given the police fresh clues, but for now they don't know what to make of them. The lead officer tries to reassure Mick's grieving family.
He'd come out and he'd explain there is things happening and we are working, but obviously we can't tell you everything in case it leaks out or in case it's wrong information we're receiving. He said, but trust me, we will sort this out and we will come one day with the answers for you.
For the police, the pressure is on. Then Angela McGee has another startling revelation.
I woke up the one morning, as I do sometimes, with messages. What I kept getting in my mind was a dolphin, block switch, dolphin, block switch.
Angela phones a friend to tell her about the message.
I was telling her about, I'm sure this is to do with the murder. I was getting the dolphin, block switch, a dolphin, block switch. And she said, there's a dolphin pub. I wanted to relay that information to Mike Crump, so I gave him a call.
Operation Greenside, DC Crump speaking, how can I help you?
And I told him about the dolphin and block switch and that something would happen in 3 days. All of a sudden, I get a name.
Yeah, OK, let's just get a pad and I'll just write it down.
I felt it was more like a nickname of either Daz or Gaz. And I felt that was also associated with murder.
Angela's information is relayed to the incident room, but for now, it's useless. Then, the police make a key discovery. They find the missing safe in a canal.
This is the canal at Slacky Lane, from where we recovered the safe that was from the Royal Oak pub. It was a breakthrough. It is important that we recover physical evidence, such as the safe.
Suddenly, Angela's message about the dolphin becomes clear.
And the Dolphin Public House is situated just at the top of the road, about 150 yards away from the spot where I'm standing now.
There is no earthly way that Angela could have known this.
At the time that Angela spoke to us about the Dolphin Public House, there was no obvious connection between that pub and our investigation. It hadn't featured at all. At the very least, it was interesting.
Police are left wondering about Angela's message of the nickname.
The difficulty for us, where do you put Angela? What do you do with what Angela can tell you? And the problem is that you can't use it, can you? You can't ask Angela to step into a Crown Court witness box and on oath say, I'm a medium and I know what happened. It's completely inadmissible.
To convict, they still need more concrete evidence. Then, exactly 6 months after the murder, the Royal Oak pub is burgled again. This time, police get the lead they've been waiting for.
Bizarrely, on the exact 6-month anniversary of Mick's death at the pub was broken into again in very chillingly similar circumstances.
This time, eyewitnesses recognize the thief. Part-time bartender Gavin Chapman, son of Beryl Chapman, Mick Hughes' partner at the Royal Oak.
Gavin Chapman had a severe drug problem. We believed he was addicted to heroin and possibly crack cocaine. Michael Hughes was always quite suspicious that Gavin was taking money from him in various forms in order to fund his drug addiction.
The police had always suspected Gavin Chapman might be involved in the murder, but he has an alibi with 2 other men, Stephen Lockley and Lee Worgan.
We had evidence that cast doubt on their movements in terms of the accounts that they had given. But as far as convicting them for a murder was concerned, we had very little.
Now the police take a gamble. They bring all 3 men in for questioning. One by one, the men are interrogated and their stories scrutinized.
In the initial stages, they stuck by their witness statements.
I think they thought that if they maintained their original pack of lies, that they would walk I'm sure that they were that blasé and confident that they thought they could just bluff it out.
Relatively quickly into the interview process, one of them changed the story.
And they began to point the finger at each other.
The men confess to burgling the Royal Oak on the night of the murder. They accuse each other of being the killer. Police decide to charge them all with murder as a joint enterprise. It's a bold strategy.
There was a concern that was at the back of my mind that around that joint enterprise argument, the jury wouldn't be able to clearly identify in their own minds who it was that struck the fatal blows.
We felt that we had a very good and a very strong case, but you are in the hands of the jury.
You're hopeful, but you've always just, you're crossing two fingers and hoping for the best.
The trial is set for October 2004 in Birmingham, with 3 men charged, at least one of whom knew Mick and worked behind the bar. Everything that Angela told the police seems to be coming true. Gavin Chapman, Lee Worgan, and Stephen Lockley are set to be tried for Mick Hughes' murder. Waiting for the result, Angela goes on with her normal work as a medium.
It was a few months later, after I had my visit to the Royal Oak, that I had a phone call.
Carol Hall has lost her mother and wants a medium to contact her in spirit.
I had no previous knowledge of Angela before this phone number was handed to me. In fact, she was one of about 4 numbers that were handed to me. And the reason I picked Angela was because she was the one more local, because I didn't know if there was a radius to how far they'd travel. And the address was pretty local, so I thought I'd go for Angela.
Angela visits Carol one evening at her home.
Angela sat in the bedroom and I sat on the chair, more or less opposite to her.
The spirit of a mother came through, and I felt that her mother's energy was all around the bedroom where we were. And then I told Carol that her mother was with her son in spirit.
Got to talking about it, and then they just said, which was the devastating bit, who's Michael? And that was when I just went to pieces, and I says, that was my brother. And she said, your mum's telling me she called him Michael, everybody else called him Mick, which was spot on.
Then all of a sudden, I had a flash of the Royal Oak and a flash of Mick in my mind. And I said, it's Mick from the Royal Oak murder.
The look on Angela's face, it couldn't be captured on tape when she suddenly realised who she was talking about. She said, he keeps telling me, I've been there, and he says, can I ask, is it the pub in Pelsall? And I says, yeah.
It's an amazing revelation. Angela didn't know it, but Carol Hall is Mick Hughes' sister. Mick's spirit has sought her out again.
I could hear Mick say that he would see justice, and he would see justice 3 times. All I heard was justice, justice, justice. And then I says to Carol, I can see the family with their hands up in the air in triumph. And he also said something about Stafford and time, which I had to relay, which didn't make sense to me at the time.
With the trial hanging in the balance, Angela's message gives comfort to Carol.
With my brother coming through via Angela and saying that justice will be done, she was so right with Mum. I wanted this to be so right as well.
But until the jury gives their verdict, the family can only hope that Angela's telling the truth. Just days before the trial is due to start in Birmingham, part of Mick's message becomes clear. Another case has overrun. The trial is moved to Stafford Crown Court.
The court case, up until the Friday prior to the Monday's date for the court case, was going to be Birmingham, then it was going to be Wolverhampton, and on the Monday we had to go to Stafford, which was uncanny, very uncanny because we weren't aware of that. Nobody was.
For police and the family, it's a tense time.
You've always got that element of doubt in the back of your mind, and you're worried about how the jury will perceive the evidence that you feel is very strong, and how your witnesses will come across as well.
The trial runs for 3 long weeks.
I was struck by how appallingly badly the 3 male defendants conducted themselves throughout the whole trial. They sat at the back of the court and grinned, chuckled to each other, made smug comments about some of the witnesses that appeared in the witness box. And when they were ultimately asked to give evidence, they made the worst job of it I've ever seen in my life. They were absolutely appalling. They were flippant, clearly telling lies. Chapman was asked whether he wanted to take the oath, and his very first words to the jury were, whatever. He did himself no favours.
To hear people read it out as to the horrific injuries and how they occurred and how many times they hit my dad, that was really hard. And at one stage my mum and my 2 brothers had to leave because they couldn't cope. Because to everybody else it's a story, to us it was our dad.
Finally, the moment of truth arrives.
When the jury went out, the courtroom is charged with emotion.
It's all right, you're just sitting there thinking, please God, let them say guilty.
The 3 men are found guilty. As Angela predicted, justice has been done 3 times.
Each of the 3 men were convicted of the murder of Michael Hughes. They were also convicted of burglary and attempting to pervert the course of justice in terms of having lied to us in the form of their witness statements.
It was just unreal. It was a dream come true.
As the family leave court, a photographer is waiting.
He said, well, for the picture, you're going to have to punch the air and smile.
In a flash, Angela's last vision becomes reality.
But when I saw them, their hands go up, and I thought, yeah, that's completed the picture now.
Angela's messages to the police and the family seem to have proved uncannily accurate.
On speaking to Angela initially, I was quite cynical and sceptical about the nature of the information she provided. But in the fullness of time, aspects of it turned out to be quite accurate. Whilst it was always of limited value to us as police officers, this was nevertheless surprising.
Stepping outside the police officer function and thinking about myself as a person and Carol and Sharon spending some time with Angela, if I found myself in the same circumstances and I saw that olive branch of hope, would I reach out for it? Yeah, I probably would.
It's been an incredible experience for Angela.
I feel I've done my job's worth. I know that I work for the God Energy Force and the God Energy Spirit, and I'm just an instrument. But to me, it's like a pat on the back, I think. It was just a nice pat on the back.